Hello, hello. Welcome to another day, another daily check-in with Claire Wasserman here, founder and author of Ladies Get Paid. We are an educational platform, global community, and book, of course, that is all about helping women earn more, live better. Every day now, or as many days as I can, I try to go live to share a lesson. And I'm so excited because I've had all of these amazing women join me to also share the lessons that they implement in their practice. Most of them are coaches, money coaches, career coaches, business coaches, wellness coaches. We actually have a little bit of a different person today, Marissa Taffer, who's technically not a coach, but she has such good insights to share. I had to have her on. She's also a Ladies Get Paid Pro member. So if you're interested in learning more about that, go to ladiesgetpaid.com/join. Marissa, I want you to talk more. I mean, you know yourself best and the work that you do. I know you work with digital agencies, marketing departments, and you really specialize in project management. Could you talk to me more specifically about the work that you do? And then we're going to get into strategies for avoiding invisible work so that you can be strategic in how you grow your career. And of course, we'll define what that means. But thank you, Marissa, for being here. And I'd love for you to share more details about the kind of work you do and why you chose to focus our session today on the invisible aspect.
Sure. So as you said, I am a certified project manager. You can see I have some credentials after my name that are pretty unique to the project management industry. So if you work in that industry, those will probably mean more to you than some of the other folks tuning in. So I work as like a fractional project manager. So I come into digital agencies who either have somebody out or have just won like a big influx of business and need some extra help, 3 to 6 months, maybe a little bit longer, but don't necessarily need somebody full time to manage those kind of projects. Since projects by nature are temporary, I tend to come in and do some temporary things. I also consult on project management tools and process. So I've worked pretty extensively with Asana, which is a project management tool, but I also go into agencies and kind of try to understand what kind of work they're doing, who's doing the work, and help them streamline process, put in some tools to help them feel more organized, have more control of the work, more visibility into who's doing what and when, which also can help with things like capacity planning. And, what we're really here talking about today is the bottom line, making more money.
Yeah, awesome. Great segue. So for all the coaches who come on or all the folks who come on, I say, hey, listen, I want to focus on whatever you're most excited to talk about. And you said to me, you wanted to really have our conversation center around how to avoid invisible work. So I would love to know why that was the topic that you chose. And then if we can dive into what invisible work actually is, that would be, I think, a great place to begin.
Yeah, so this is something really personal to me. Like many women, I started my career as an admin. As I found in my experience, more women start as admins than men, whereas men maybe come in more as a low-level manager or an analyst or those kinds of titles, whereas a lot of women start with a title like administrative assistant, coordinate. I was a sales coordinator. And early on, you're young, you're smart, you're in these roles, and your boss or folks in the organization will say to you, hey, I've got this special project. And we tend to take on some of those special projects thinking they're going to lead to better experience or, hopefully a promotion or more money. And depending upon the nature, and why we'll talk about what invisible work means, if it's something that is truly in the umbrella of invisible work, that's not what happens. Maybe we get the pat on the head. But not only was this my experience, but I don't think I mentioned that I do some freelance writing. I was writing for a digital project management website. And one of the topics that came up was around project management versus administrative manager or project admin. And like, what's the difference? And this topic of invisible work was one of the key things that came up. And as I was doing my research, I came across a Harvard Business Review article that said that women are 44% more likely to be asked to volunteer for this invisible work than men.
Yeah.
So that's why I want to talk about it.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, I'm really glad that somebody just commented, yes, admin assistant. And now I'm kind of stuck there. The special project move resonates. Yeah. I'm so glad that we're going to get into this. I actually didn't realize that's how you started your career. I think that I would love, actually, if you don't mind going to a little bit more of your personal story of how you were able to strategically navigate your way. And if you ever experienced what somebody had recently said to me, she called it baby bear syndrome. That was more about being looked at as really junior. So however you first came into the organization, kind of like forever solidifies that position in people's mind. And so if you're very junior, it's going to be hard to grow out of that. Or if you have a certain kind of role, like an admin assistant or, executive assistant, does that then, I mean, people are classist in organizations too, regardless of like junior. I think there's certain kinds of roles that other people tend to take for granted. And then what I hate is when I see the folks who are in those roles also take themselves for granted. They feel like the work they're doing is not super, super important and can't be, demonstrated or negotiated to make the case how it really impacts the business bottom line, and you're actually doing work that should absolutely be rewarded. So I am curious for you how you were able to break out of that quote baby bear syndrome.
Yeah, it took a really long time, and so I'm hoping some of the things that we talk about today will shorten that curve for other folks on this call, or who are listening later. Really quickly, first, I just want to make sure we define what invisible work is before I jump into my story, so that we're all on the same page about what we're listening for. Invisible work is really the work that, or tasks that, they benefit the organization, but they don't lead to promotion. So, in project management, sometimes that might be, and some of the, like, there's going to be a gray area because some of these are very much part of the job, but like, they don't always have to be the project manager. So things like taking the notes, ordering lunch, doing a cross-functional project to make a process better. Unless there's quantifiable results that you can point to, some of these things, and depending on organization to organization, what these specific examples are can vary a lot. So I started my career as a sales admin, supporting a couple of sales managers who basically sold Philadelphia as a tourism destination. So my bosses were gold on the meetings and conventions that they brought in by room nights. So how many hotel rooms were anticipated to be booked as a result of them signing this convention. So, my core job was really things like helping to get sales leads entered, coordinating with hotels, helping with site visits, handling, basically all that like back end admin sales work, so that the sales managers are out with the customers, and all the paperwork and everything else that has to be done on the back end, because there's a lot of that with sales, is handled by the sales coordinators. So when I started, every other coordinator had like 3 managers, and I only had 2. Just because of the number of managers in the office and the needs. So my job sort of became sales coordinator, and, that other duties as assigned would start to grow and grow and grow. And because of, just the timing in my career and recessions and things like that, I stayed in the role for almost 5 years. And during that time, I grew to be able to do a number of things that were probably, they were not things I would have done in the first year and a half of that job. And the last year I was in that role, the company started to go through, strategic planning, and they did, as many organizations do, we did cascading goals. So, the CEO had theirs, the department heads had theirs, the directors, the managers, all the way down to the coordinators. So as things started to cascade and my bosses and I are working on what these goals look like, I went and sat down and said, hey, here are all the things I need to do to support you. Here are all the other things that I do in this organization that aren't falling under this like cascading goals, but they're part of my job. Like what happens? And then it's like, oh yeah, I guess you just do it all. And then it's like, well, wait a minute. If I do all of this, is there room to talk about compensation? Is there room to talk about advancement? Like, where do I go from here? And the answer was not really, like, there wasn't an answer, which, like, for better or for worse, no answer is information. It's kind of, this is what you're going to do. And if hindsight being what it is, taking that information and starting to make some decisions for myself is what would have been really important. And I had started to do that. I actually went and pitched my department head at the time on another role. Basically, I said, here's all the stuff that falls outside of it. These are the things that I love to do. Here's how I see this role going. And they said, that's cute, but we don't have budget for that. It was like, great. Okay. So about 6 months later, they did start to reorganize the coordinator level roles, and they had built a role that sounded a lot more like what I was doing and the things that I wanted to do. And there were some personnel changes. So now I'm meeting with new people and trying to basically sell them on giving me this role, when in my head I'm going, if you don't give me this role, I'm going to have to train this person. Like, what's that going to feel like for me? I was really worried about it. And while that was happening on a parallel path, a large global company that had headquarters in my backyard had reached out through a recruiter and said, hey, we're recruiting for this other management position in our global sales office, and we need a really unique skill set. We think you might have it. Will you talk to us about it? So while I'm kind of interviewing for a lateral move, this much more senior position starts coming my way, and it ended up working out. But then again, I'm putting myself in a role where, I'm not a salesperson, but I'm working in sales. So the work that we're doing, like, it is a little harder to quantify and a little harder to get to the bottom line, especially the kind of role I had.
Mm-hmm.
It was the role where an administrative assistant leaves off.
Mm-hmm.
So higher level presentations. It's where I started dipping my toe into project management. It was probably one of the best business educations I could have gotten, looking at different lines of service, lines of business, how they go to market, what is the strategy, working in sales training, just really, really invaluable. But I'm going, okay, now how do I quantify this to go do, like, what is the next thing and how do I quantify this? So going back to what you were saying about, baby bear syndrome is I came in as this communications manager. I started to grow these skills, and I'm still being looked at as that, like, fairly junior communications manager, when now it's been 5 years and I've taken on some really high visibility projects. And I didn't feel like, because, it wasn't like an HR career where you're an HR admin, then you're an HR manager, then you're an HR director, and then you're the HR VP. It was a little bit more nebulous, and that there's a lot of ways that I could have taken that. And there's a couple directions I did take it, but it just was one of those things that it's like, okay, well, now you have to figure this out yourself because nobody's telling you where to go.
Right. And I know that is something that's a value you've expressed to me that you think is just fundamental to self-advocacy, which is taking command, like being intentional, not waiting, because you have seen it, where you were putting in the years for them and you took what you could. And then at some point you have to move on. I mean, I'd love for you to take this conversation in any direction you want. I guess for me, I am curious, for somebody who's in a position where they are doing a lot of invisible work, what might be your advice to them? Because I'm seeing it as sort of like they're at a crossroads of, do I say no to the work? Do I make the work visible? Do I add different work? Obviously, there's not a one size fits all advice, but what, as tangible as we can be for somebody in that position at that crossroads, would love you to counsel them.
Yeah, I'm going to give some advice that, like, kind of take what fits for you and leave the rest. But there's a couple of things. So if it's truly some of the stuff, like, I'm the one that's always doing, the birthday celebrations or ordering the lunches. Like, first, can you delegate it? Can you share the responsibility? So, first name it and say, hey, I've noticed that I'm the one that's doing, whatever the task is. Would it be possible for us to rotate and take turns so it doesn't become such a heavy lift? And then, explaining if it's not such a heavy lift, I mean, here's all the other things I can be doing that, support the organization. Maybe they're more interesting. Maybe they're more visible. I also think having a conversation with your manager, like, if you feel like your work is tipping to, it's not a small percent anymore, and you're struggling to quantify, you're sitting down for performance review, you're struggling to quantify, what it was my impact this year. And you're realizing that a lot of the work you did is really important, but it's also invisible. Have that conversation, however it goes. Again, that's just going to be information that you have. If you get the pat on the head and the baby bear syndrome of, oh, that's nice, keep doing it, and oh, by the way, we need you to also take on these 12 other things. maybe it's time to start looking at something else, or, having a conversation with a mentor, seeing what their perspective is. Sometimes we get such a tunnel vision focus on our work that, like, not being able to come up and see the bigger picture and how critically important it is. Is there another way to spin it? Is there a way to make sure you're advocating for yourself and getting credit that you're not doing? So whether it's a mentor that's in the organization and knows the organization well, or sometimes it's really helpful to just go outside and say, hey, this is what's going on in my organization, without giving out, too much proprietary detail or anything, but going to someone you trust and saying, here's my situation. What do you think? Like, do you have any suggestions? What kind of things would you try? Especially if it's somebody in your industry. And then also just trying to, one of the things, like, in the earlier years for me, I didn't know how to handle it. And there was a project that I took on that was really, really just an administrative exercise in absolute torture. And I don't think the people above me or around me realized what they were asking me to do until later. And I got real vocal about it. I let people know how I felt about it. And that probably did not help, my image in the organization. And about 6 months after everything kind of blew up, my boss and I were sitting there. He goes, so wait, this is what we asked you to do? And I said, yeah, that's why I was so upset about it. He said, you know what? Sometimes you just have to wait for people to get there. Like, we were not understanding why this was upsetting you so much that we were asking you to do this. And that was a really powerful moment for me of realizing that, well, I had articulated that I was unhappy about it. I thought everybody understood what they were asking me to do. I thought everybody understood where this was going, and they didn't. So my advice would be, especially if it's something where you're taking on. First of all, if you are, and you're getting to a point where you feel like you're really frustrated by it, try to have the conversation before it all starts boiling over. But if you are in a place where you're taking it on, you're emotional, I think especially now as the economy is just really weird and we're hearing a lot of mandates around do more with less, and people are kind of running around a little bit scared. I think having those conversations and trying to either mitigate it or own it in a way that feels good for you is going to be critically important right now.
How do you know when it's time to move on?
I think it's different for everybody. Like, I've just always gut feeling, like, when you're not growing, you're not learning, you're starting to feel resentful. It's, the same things every day, and you don't feel good in the role anymore, for whatever reason. I think that's a really good sign that it's time to move on. It's just that you don't feel like you're learning, you don't feel like you're growing, and that stagnation, I think, is a really powerful indication of, maybe even if it's not like it's time to leave today, it's time to have the conversation with myself about, where do I want to go next? What do I want to explore? What do I want to learn? And even if it's not leaving, maybe it's asking for some continuing education or to upskill in an area. There are a lot of reasons why people stay in jobs, whether it's geography, staying with a spouse, or having, really phenomenal benefits or flexible schedules with children. So even if it's not leaving, maybe it's upskilling, maybe it's trying to figure out if there's an avenue for advancement where you are now, if you feel like you're not growing, and starting to have those conversations. And again, if it's something that you go to your manager and say, hey, this is something I'm really passionate about, this is something I want to try or do or learn, and you get shut down, again, that's information. Maybe that's the next step of saying, well, if there's not more growth for me here, it's time to start looking. And when you start looking, you might say, hey, actually I have a really good thing here. It's not time to leave, or, wow, I've had this when this is a thing that's out there.
Brittany wants to know, what do you mean by upskilling?
So continuing education, either learning a new skill, or, like, let's say I'm going to use project management just because it's.
Yeah. And I would love for you also to give, because we talked right before we jumped on about your acronyms and how to get decisions. I'd love to, and how that's maybe helped you earn more money. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so upskilling could be getting a certification. That was exactly the example that I was going to use. So when I was in this global sales role, I had taken on a lot of project management and was getting feedback that I was good at it. And when I started looking at, I didn't know a lot about the discipline of project management as a profession. And when I started looking into it through like Project Management Institute, there's a great website. I actually write for them, thedigitalprojectmanager.com, if you want to learn more. I started looking at salary surveys, and I said, a administrative professional or a communications manager, I knew what those salary trends were like. And when I looked at a project manager with this certification, the salary was about 30 grand more than I was making. And I went, so if I just change my title, I'm going to get more money, which isn't exactly how it happened. But within about 2 years after getting the certification, within about 2 years, I was there.
Wow.
So that's what I mean about upskilling. So, I was already doing some project management, but then I was formally credentialed and doing it on a bigger scale.
And I don't know if Brittany wants to give more detail about maybe what they're thinking, and also Marquita, like if any context you have for your situation, we can be, as helpful as we can try to be. What would you say might be for somebody who's feeling a little bit stuck with where they're at, but they don't yet have a sense of where they want to go? What might be some questions that they can be asking themselves or asking other people? What are ways that you figured out your next steps? And then also I'd love to hear about your decision to start your own company and what that looked like for you in terms of strategic growth.
Sure. I think the questions are really going to depend on where you think you want to go. But I think having conversations with other people who have, either been in your shoes or are in places where you're thinking about going. So, it's the old adage of like, don't take criticism from people you wouldn't take advice from. Like, seek out those people who you do tend to take advice from and say, how did you decide to join this organization, or how did you decide that this was the right profession? Asking people what they like about it. I will say with the Ladies Get Paid community, a lot of us are very transparent about money and earning potentials and salary ranges, and having those conversations, I think, can help shape what you're looking for. So, I was working in a big global company, and when I looked up and around, a lot of the jobs that would have been next for me in that company were travel, like really, really heavy travel. And I knew because of some things in my life, that was not something that I could take on at that time. So I knew that those weren't the right places for me, not because I didn't like the company, not because it was a bad company. It was a fantastic company. But I knew for me, I couldn't go be, I didn't want to go be a salesperson on the road 300 days a year. I knew that wasn't, in my heart and soul, that wasn't the right thing. For example, looking at other industries, if you're thinking about, nonprofit, knowing that salaries may be lower, if salary is really important to you, maybe nonprofit's not quite the way to go. So starting to look at that, or understanding that, on the technical side of project management, maybe there's more money than on a non-technical project. Like all of those things that you start to learn, you see, hey, that feels good, or maybe that doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Right. You're thinking about lifestyle, you're thinking about values, you're checking in with your intuition. Something else that I find people should take more seriously is, where do you currently spend a lot of your attention? And if you are a person who's like, I am constantly buying books, taking out books from the library on a certain subject, or I'm, when I look at the paper, I'm drawn to certain articles or categories, like there's information there that can be incredibly useful to at least point you in a direction where you can now start talking to folks about, what are your day-to-day challenges? What does your lifestyle look like? Obviously, what is the paycheck? We have a friend who recently got laid off in, I'm totally blanking on, she's a copywriter. I'm blanking on the industry that she was in. But she is now really going to go for climate tech, because she's really passionate about that. Those are the, when she looked at, where is my time, where does my attention, where does my energy tend to be? It's like getting up in arms about climate as a cause. Now, she may ultimately do more research and decide, the paycheck's not good enough, and I'm happy to keep it as a, a weekend project that I, volunteer on. That's okay. She's not at that point yet. But the fact that she took her interest seriously, her curiosity seriously as information for direction, I'm really proud of her that she did that. And it's exciting. It's exciting to like realize you don't have to make this stuff up. Like you're already probably living in, just a way that you're, again, like showing up in the world. There's so much information in that. And it's not that you need to do something new or do something differently. It might just be actually leaning more into the way you already are or the things you're already interested in. My caffeine just like completely evaporated as I was speaking. I had a cup of coffee, and as I was saying that sentence, I was like, I hope it's still making sense. Marissa, anything? Oh, I'd love to hear, we've got about 5 more minutes, but I'd love to hear A, anything else you want to share, but B, maybe your decision to start your own company, in this whole kind of ethos of like strategic growth. Why did that for you in your career? Why was that the next best move?
Yeah, I had come off of 2 jobs that were really, really challenging for a lot of reasons. I learned a ton in both roles. One of them actually was a consulting client when I did start my business. So it just was naturally part of the evolution. And when people do start going out on their own, just for one more little tactical thing, looking to past employers as clients is a really smart move. It's a great way to launch, if you're thinking about leaving something to start your own thing and saying, hey, I could stay on and do some contract work in the transition, whatever those needs look like. But it just, actually a mentor of mine was like, you should do this. And I was like, well, I don't know how to run a business. I'm not really great with money. I'm terrified and I don't know. And so she literally had so much faith in me that she was like, here is a client. This woman already wants to work with you. And I was like, okay. So I said, okay, you know what? I have nothing to lose right now. I'm going to try it. If it doesn't work, I can always, have a good story, start interviewing for full-time jobs again. And so I said, let's try it. Within another week, another client come on. This former employer had called and said, hey, we think you're consulting. Is there any way you'd consult for us? And I was like, sure. So I ended up staying with them almost a year. I've been running my business about 5 years. And Claire, I think what you said really resonated with me about digging into things you're curious about. I started as mostly sales consulting, moved back into project management, which is really where I spend the bulk of my time. And then the other part of my time is freelance writing. I've written about dog food. I've written about sales. I've written about project management. I've written about pajamas. I've written about coffee. So being able to, not only lean into things that are really important to me, but also being able to do it in a way that, the bottom line, I'm getting paid for. Even the clients that, I've tried some other industries that I had not worked in, and sometimes it works great and sometimes it's just a good lesson. But at the end of the day, working for myself, I'm getting paid to learn as much as I'm getting paid to improve the patients that I go into and work with ultimately. So it really just feels like a big win for me, for clients. I've really enjoyed the diversity of client that I've gotten to work with, the diversity of the engagements. And it's really been a great lesson in learning how to, manage my career, manage that growth, manage my money, decide when it's time to invest, whether it's a new certification or a new service offering.
How do you decide? Because it is true that like anytime you do career development, it's an investment, at least in your time and energy. How do you determine if something is worth? I mean, I guess that goes back to that question of upskilling.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a couple of things. First of all, it's, how big of an investment is it? And then how much impact can it have? So for example, I did my CSM this year. Things had slowed down. The companies that do a lot of that training, the cost of doing that certification had gone down significantly since the first time I had looked at it.
Can you just say what the acronym stands for folks?
Yeah, sure. It's a certified Scrum Master. So Scrum is a framework for project management. It is sometimes either confused or conflated with Agile, if you're familiar with that. but it really just, it's very different than the PMP certification they have. It's very rigorous. You need years of experience to sit for the PMP. You need 35 education hours, whereas the CSM certification has no prerequisite other than a 2-day course and a test. So it's a very different certification. It was a very different way of looking at managing projects. And I've actually, like, literally right after I did it, I had the opportunity to do some coaching for an agency that does agile projects. So while I had done, I dabbled in the past, having this really formal education and credential really helped me to come in and help this organization. And I really, it's been one of my favorite projects that I've done so far. So I think that was probably the right move. But, it's that cost benefit analysis of, what are you going to learn from doing this educational opportunity? And then how much is that going to impact clients? Is it going to make people want to hire you more? Is it going to make people more excited about working with you? Is it just going to, for a lot of project managers, it's just codifying experience that we already have? Do I think that, having done that course necessarily makes me a better project manager? Debatable. Did I learn some tools and tricks and frameworks that I can bring into my consulting practice and work through with clients? Absolutely.
Awesome. We are technically at time, but I'd love to just leave you with the floor of anything else you'd like to share. And of course, how people can find you, follow you, and most importantly, pay you.
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me. I really hope this was helpful for folks who are thinking about their careers, evaluating kind of where they want to go next. As far as where to find me, you can find me over in Circle with the rest of the Ladies Get Paid crew. I'm also at mtafferconsulting.com. If you want to learn a little bit more about my work, there's also a contact form on the website. So if you do want to explore working together, I would be happy to have that conversation, or you can find me over on LinkedIn if you just want to connect and stay in touch.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Marissa. Appreciate you and all your work, everybody who watched, all the great questions and who shared. And best of luck. Now go get paid.